Saving of the pumping station. In May 1968, Cheddars Lane pumping station was closed down by the City Council, as its pumping capacity was no longer large enough for Cambridge's population. A new all-electric pumping station was built next door on Riverside. On 17th of September 1968, Cambridge News reported that the pumping station was to be demolished, and the pumping equipment dismantled and given away or sold. The city's surveyor believed that the pumping equipment was not old enough to have any historic value. However, John Sharp, a student from Cambridge University Department of Engineering, had a different opinion. As a child, he had visited the pumping station as one of his relatives worked there, and believed that the non-rotative Haythorne-Davy engines were historically important and should be saved. Along with two fellow students, Ken Moxham and Alex Ritchie, a group was formed to save the engines and pumping station and create a museum around them. A group of Cambridge Instrument Company employers also believed that the engines were worth saving. They joined the three students, becoming known as the Cambridge Engineers. The group petitioned the council to save the pumping station. They were successful, and on 14th of October 1968, the decision to demolish Cheddars Lane pumping station was blocked. However, they only had 6 weeks to come up with a plan for what to do with the pumping station. The next steps. The need for a plan led to the formation of the Cambridge Society for Industrial Archaeology, CSIA, in November 1968. The principal aim of the CSIA was the formation of the Museum of Technology and the preservation of the steam engines at Cheddars Lane. It was decided that CSIA would not run the museum, so a museum trust was formed to negotiate with the council's Public Works Committee and be responsible for the buildings and funding. In February 1969, the Public Works Committee agreed in principle to turn the pumping station into a museum. The debate continued over how the museum would be funded. While these negotiations continued, the trust was not allowed access to the site. The pumping station fell into further disrepair. By late 1969, the trust was given permission to enter the site and began repairing and securing the building. In March 1970, the council awarded a grant that would cover the rent. By December, the pumping station building was registered as a scheduled monument, ensuring its survival. The council gave the trust 1 year for a museum to be formed and to open to the public. While the trust continued to work out the legal details, a working committee was formed to transfer the old pumping station into a museum. In 1978, a large donation was made by local businessman Don Mackay to allow the museum to purchase the freehold of the site. By 1980, the museum's site and buildings were the property of the trust. Opening the doors. After a year of hard work by the volunteers to get the site ready, Cambridge Museum of Technology opened to the public for the first time for a steam weekend in May 1971.
We opened to the public and we really had no idea what the response would be. The internet didn't exist in those days, so publicity was much, much more difficult. We managed to get it into the local press. We had about half a dozen traction engines. We had a model steam railway running. It was certainly pretty crowded. It generated a lot of interest. The key thing was that gave the council the confidence that this was something worth having. Began to see the tourism potential.
In 1909, 2 national gas engines were installed at Cheddar's Lane pumping station to increase the pumping capacity. When the pumping station was in use, the gas engines were run using town gas, the synthetic gas, which was manufactured and stored at gasworks. Natural gas was brought to Cambridge at the same time as the pumping station was to close. The gas engines would have required converting if the pumping station hadn't closed when it did. This meant that when volunteers wanted to get the gas engines working again, they needed to find an alternative source of gas to power them. In the early 1970s, volunteers, including Don Fisher and Don Unwin, worked on the gas engines. They worked out that the only viable fuel source would be propane gas. The gas engines were operating again in 1971, in time for the first opening weekend in May. In April 1986, the gas engines were connected to the main gas supply. Work is being done to the ignition system, but the north engine should be running in the near future. Return to steam. Restoration of the Haythorne-Davies steam engines began in 1974, under the guidance of Percy Lyon, a volunteer who had worked at the pumping station until its closure.
In 1984, Paul and Chris Webb from Nottingham turned up and joined the volunteers, and they had existing experience with steam museums elsewhere. There were a lot more steam museums running by then. Chris is one of the most expert people on restoring steam engines in the country, and they just gritted their teeth, got a boiler inspector in, and he passed it first time.
Work was completed on the north engine in March 1984, a triumph after 6 years of hard work. The official return to steam took place on 26th of May 1985, when the Mayor of Cambridge was invited to start the Haythorne-Davie engine.
The print room. The university's need for academic books drove the printing industry in Cambridge. Later, newspapers enabled information to reach a wider audience. In the 1970s, printer and museum volunteer Chris Butt persuaded firms to donate old printing equipment. The museum's collection includes presses used for a wide range of functions. The Steam Winch House. The foundations of the new Steam Winch House were laid by volunteers in 1987. The steam winch was installed and working in 1991 and won a Steam Heritage Award in 1994.
In a 1991 survey, it was discovered that the top of the chimney had some serious and potentially dangerous faults, and that it would cost £8,000 to repair it. The museum was unable to fund this project and appealed to the public for donations. One of the museum's volunteers approached Fred Dibner. Fred, a well-known steeplejack and television personality, was asked to quote how much it would cost to do the work. His price was the best, and it was decided he would do the work. Fred arrived at the museum on the 11th of May 1992 to start the work and set up his famous Dibner flying scaffold. The scaffolding was erected very quickly. The repair work was completed by June. Fred's presence at the museum gained a lot of attention and helped generate enough money to cover the remaining cost of the chimney repairs. In 2014, it was discovered that there were leaking tubes in the boiler. The decision was made to shut down the boiler. At this point, it was clear that the boiler needed a full retube and refurbishment, especially as its inspection and hydraulic test was due that year. The boiler refurbishment was included as part of the Heritage Lottery Fund redevelopment project. After over 45 years of volunteers keeping the museum running and limited opening to the public, the museum was awarded a £1 million grant in May 2016 by the Heritage Lottery Fund for the project Steam, Sewage and Semiconductors, Preserving the Industrial History of Cambridge. This project set out to redevelop the museum into a museum for the 21st century by creating new displays on the old pumping station and Cambridge Industries, improving access and facilities, restoring the historic No. 4 boiler, and bringing the original engines back to life. In spring 2017, the project started. Over the next few years, the museum was transformed. Collections were reviewed, packed and moved. Displays were researched, written and designed. The former Spatman building was replaced by the new Pye building. Boiler No. 4 was restored, carried out by steam boiler specialist contractors. A new access ramp and entrance to the museum were built. External displays were moved, and objects were conserved and restored. The museum was able to reopen to the public in 2019.
What you need to understand is that 1970 was very early in the whole steam preservation movement. That's now part of what we call industrial archaeology. The term industrial archaeology was only 3 years old at the time. We're one of the first 10 steam museum projects in the UK. Now, my society's latest guide on steam museums or preserved steam engines lists over 220 sites.
To be a volunteer means lots of things, but the most important is the community and the legacy. Our engines are unique. We want to keep that story alive because they're historic objects.
And we're celebrating 50 years since the very first steam day at the museum back in May 1971. Unfortunately, 50 years on from that exact date, the museum was in one of the lockdowns, but we're taking advantage of some lovely weather in July to have our birthday bash. I love being the curator of this museum. One of the very exciting things for me is that a lot of our collections actually produced within living memory, and the most exciting thing that happens for me is when I meet people who invented things, designed them, made them, marketed them. That's what's very special for me. Also that the museum, because it's to do with working life in Cambridge is very much at the heart of the community, and so it's just been wonderful today being here with representatives of community groups who have come to support us and our local community radio station. So yeah, two things for me: that's the joy of curating a collection where I can talk to the people who made these things, and also just the importance of the museum in the local community. One of the iconic parts of the museum is its chimney, and you can see it across Cambridge. When you leave Cambridge on a train going out towards Ely, I always have to put myself on the carriage in the train so I can see, there it is! We recently did a lottery-funded project which allowed us to review what we got, get things out of the pumping station and into a specially designed building for more high-tech stuff produced by PI and Cambridge Scientific Instrument Company. However, at the moment our displays pretty much end sometime around 1980, so my vision for the future is to start being a museum of local technology and bringing it up to date, which obviously goes more into digital things. Particularly interested personally in printing. Cambridge has got centuries of printing history. Our print shop is tiny and shoved into what was a little workshop at the pumping station, and so personally I'd like to do that. Sometimes you can't always collect objects, so I'm very keen to develop our oral history collections. At the moment we've got, I think, up to about 70 oral histories, recordings with people who worked in local industries. And it's a way of capturing another side of history. I enjoy talking to people who were involved with making things, and to actually be able to talk to them for an hour with the object. So I'd like to add to the collections in that way. And as far as the community goes, we're in Abbey Ward in Cambridge, and I'd really like us to be a cultural hub for our very local community, for Cambridge as a whole, but to just make sure that people of Abbey really see this as their museum and somewhere they love to come.
We're also running a fundraiser to help us to continue to care for our industrial heritage for another 50 years. Please consider giving us a birthday present.
There is a flower within my heart, Daisy, Daisy, planted one day by a glancing dart, planted by Daisy Bear. Whether she loves me or loves me not, sometimes it's hard to tell. Still I am hoping to share the lot of sweet little Daisy Bell. Daisy, Daisy, give me an answer do. I'm half crazy, all for the love of you. It won't be a stylish marriage, I can't afford a carriage, but you look sweet upon the seat of the bicycle made for two. We will go tandem as man and wife, Daisy, Daisy, pedaling away down the road of life. I'm my Daisy now. When the road's rough we can both despise policemen and lamps as well, 'cause there are bright lights in their dazzling eyes of beautiful Daisy Bell. Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer do.